Okay, Chris Speaks back here tonight with Dr. Lucas Wilder. It's been a long time since we talked, Dr. Wilder, I think back since almost Christmas. So we're going to have an interesting discussion tonight. I think that if you ask most people what the turning point of the Civil War is, they're going to say Gettysburg, and then some will say Vicksburg. I mean, I've even seen some say Atlanta. I've had a different opinion that the Wilderness was, but you have a different take on the turning point. You want to tell us about that?
Yeah, I think it's probably the least bloodiest campaign of the American Civil War, at least far as the major campaigns go. Yet I think it's the most transformative, and that's the Tullahoma campaign, the capture of Chattanooga and the capture of Knoxville. They are kind of all together. You can't separate one from the other, so they need to be combined. So the turning point was in 1863. It's just that the turning point was in Tennessee and northern Georgia rather than in Mississippi or Pennsylvania. And one of the biggest reasons I always put towards the idea that East Tennessee, Chattanooga, and its capture are the turning points is agricultural production. I think we've discussed it before. My minor field for my PhD is in environmental history. So I like learning how we impact the environment and how the environment affects us, and we need food to live. Armies need food to be able to march across long distances and just survive. And just whether they're marching or not, they're going to have to use food either way. So, East Tennessee has this huge agricultural production. And one part of my dissertation was looking at the disparity or the differences between the Shenandoah Valley and the East Tennessee. East Tennessee East Tennessee and the Shenandoah Valley, statistically, for the most part, look almost the same agriculturally, and with production as well. The only thing that East Tennessee way outpaced the Shenandoah Valley with was hogs, which they doubled the number roughly of hogs that they produced of livestock, and corn. They, I think, is almost 12 million as opposed to around 7 million bushels of corn that came out of the Shenandoah Valley, as opposed to 12 million that came out of the East Tennessee. And so when we look at the Shenandoah Valley, it changes hands so many times. Some towns change hands tens of times, like Winchester.
Mm-hmm.
Even if the Shenandoah Valley is the breadbasket of the Confederacy, how much does actually gets out of the Shenandoah Valley when it changes hands so many times? I'll argue because it changes hands so many times, the Confederates don't have the opportunity to use those resources. But East Tennessee stays in the Confederacy for over 2 full years. And that means that they're getting those nutrients on a dependable basis rather than the Shenandoah Valley. So I start from that premise that East Tennessee supplies more agricultural goods than the Shenandoah Valley does. And there's a lot of lead mines, zinc mines, and copper mines in East Tennessee as well. All materials needed to fight the Civil War and to fuel the Confederate war effort. And one of the last pieces of the puzzle, as far as resources go, is the salt mines. They're in Southwest Virginia, but they're really close to East Tennessee. So if you can capture East Tennessee, you can more easily capture Southwest Virginia. And so millions and millions of bushels of salt are coming out of Southwest Virginia. And then you got to have a way to get it around the Confederacy. And so the East Tennessee and Virginia Railroad runs from Chattanooga, Tennessee, up to Bristol, Virginia, and then goes all the way up into Richmond, Virginia. Eventually, you can take the South Side Railroad all the way there. So all this food and resources coming out of East Tennessee is able to get to Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia and the Army of Tennessee. So both major Confederate armies are being fed by this one region. So that's kind of my premise of why East Tennessee is so important and why the Tullahoma campaign that captures Chattanooga, as well as Burnside's East Tennessee campaign, both Chattanooga and Knoxville, a large section of East Tennessee gets captured in September of 1863, which is why I'll usually declare for myself at least that East Tennessee's capture is the true turning point of the Civil War.
I remember when I met you in Hoover, you was lecturing on that. So East Tennessee with their resources, would you say that was more valuable than the Shenandoah Valley?
Absolutely. The East Tennessee outpaces the Shenandoah Valley in every category that a soldier would normally be issued rations of, except for one, and that's peas and beans, I believe. That's the only one, but it's negligible of how much they produce more than the East Tennessee. So in virtually every single category, East Tennessee outproduces Shenandoah Valley.
So that was almost crippling then when you lose that in the railroads. Would that be a safe assessment?
That's what I believe is that once you capture East Tennessee, those resources are gone. The railroad, the most direct railroad that connects the eastern and western halves of the Confederacy, is now under Union control. That's one reason that Longstreet has to go all the way from Virginia through North Carolina, South Carolina, into Georgia to come up to the Battle of Chickamauga, is because East Tennessee is captured. He can't come through that region anymore. He would have been have a more direct route, had been a quicker route had he went on the East Tennessee and Virginia Railroad, but he didn't. So I think that's probably the biggest nail in the coffin is the East Tennessee and Virginia Railroad, as well as the resources being captured. Is that it's the big? It's I think it's one of the biggest nails, and the reason I say that is I'm not sure how well Vicksburg is supplying the Confederacy with goods. It's that lifeline between Arkansas,
Right.
Louisiana, and Texas. I would really like to see the numbers of what resources are coming through there, and it might surprise you, or it might not. I'm not sure about those numbers, but having the railroad going through there, going through East Tennessee, I think makes East Tennessee a little bit more important personally. It's still a
Yeah,
long route from Texas to the rest of the Confederacy.
yeah,
East
it's
Tennessee is
interesting.
more centrally located when it comes to both armies.
Sorry, I'm going to cut you off. It's interesting you say that because I would love to see that too. Because have just tried to apply common sense to it. Like, okay, if you did get something across that river, past those gunboats, how are you then getting it past those Union troops in Mississippi? I mean, all the way up to Virginia. So I would like to see that too. I mean, I would think it'd be, maybe I am surprised at how you got it that far. But so when we look at Chattanooga, did when Bragg launched his siege, did he ever have a chance of capturing that city? Because weren't they outnumbered, what, 70 something thousand to 45,000 or?
They were slightly outnumbered, but Longstreet helped even it up. Actually, they were roughly about even until Longstreet left. Chattanooga is think of Chattanooga as similar to Corinth, Mississippi.
Okay.
Corinth is the crossroads of a major railroad junction for major railroads, and that's
Mm-hmm.
linking the like Tennessee, Mississippi, and Alabama together, which is a core heart of the Western Confederacy. Not mentioning the Trans Mississippi. Chattanooga is very similar with all these railroads running in. It is critical to hold on to, and Bragg essentially just gives it up. He gives it up. Well, he's around Chattanooga, and then William S. Rosecrans and the Army of the Cumberland have already pushed on the Tullahoma campaign all the way up to Lookout Mountain in northern Georgia. And once they start crossing Lookout Mountain, this threatens Bragg's rear, his supply lines, all of his communications with Atlanta. That's where a lot of his resources are coming from. So he has to pull back. I'm not faulting him for pulling back to save his communication lines, but he opens the door and Chattanooga is captured. And that's a critical moment when he does that. Now let's fast forward to when he's almost going to be capturing Chattanooga and recapturing it. He would have
Mm.
had, I think he would have had some chance, but he didn't have enough troops to lay a proper siege. There was always a trickle of supplies coming into the city, and that was his biggest problem. And probably the biggest mistake he made wasn't acting sooner because he's got from September all the way into November. But from September when Chickamauga happens until late November when the Orchard Knob, Lookout Mountain, and Missionary Ridge, those battles happen. Now, mid October, Ulysses S. Grant comes in, and I think by that point Bragg has kind of missed his chance because around mid-October the Cracker Line will start being opened up, and they'll be getting more resources through northern Alabama, coming up through Stevenson, Alabama, using the Tennessee River.
Did Bragg think that it being that late in the year that he could hold them till spring? Was he trying to wait? I mean,
He was in a tough position because, uh, how best to put this? Ambrose Burnside is in Knoxville.
mhm.
That is Bragg knows that that's a critical element. He's getting all kinds of messages that East Tennessee needs to be retaken, and his mentality, from what I understand, is Grant isn't going to attack. George Thomas, who is in command of the Army of the Cumberland in Chattanooga, that's the one's partially besieged, will not act. He thought he had more time on his hands, which could have meant that he was going to have could maybe not wait until the spring, but I think he believed he had a little bit more time than he actually did, and didn't realize how many Union forces were going to be concentrated in Chattanooga. That's probably one of the most amazing things, is that by the time November rolls around, there is not just one Union army in Chattanooga. You've got the Army of the Cumberland under George Thomas. You've got the Army of the Tennessee under William T. Sherman. And you have two corps from the Army of the Potomac all at Chattanooga. I mean, that's four separate armies that have, or did I count wrong? Three separate armies. Army of the Cumberland, Army of the Potomac, and Army of the Tennessee. Sorry, three armies concentrated at Chattanooga, ready to throw back and attack Braxton Bragg.
Basically like an army group.
Yes, very much like an army group, and that's the army group that goes on the Atlanta campaign as well. They the Army of the Potomac Corps, they get morphed into the 20th Corps and put with the Army of the Cumberland. So the Army of the Potomac isn't represented as the Army of the Potomac, but they're kind of incorporated into the Army of the Cumberland. But the Army of the Ohio goes with basically the army that Burnside takes into East Tennessee goes on the Atlanta campaign. So there's parts of four different armies going down towards Atlanta.
Wow.
And I guess that's probably another good reason that East Tennessee and Chattanooga are a turning point, because that opens the door to Atlanta. You have to, that's one of the best locations to start feeding your army. Sherman knows that he's going to need as many many trains and locomotives pushing supplies to him as he's going through northern Georgia, and he is concentrating all freight lines coming through here. He's coordinating them, making sure that they can run to Chattanooga. And that's why it's so critical that Chattanooga is used as that base of operations, and then they can use the the rail line going from Chattanooga to Atlanta. As they go down, they simply repair it and can keep fueling that army. So that's another reason the Atlanta campaign doesn't take place unless Chattanooga's captured.
So I mean, Bragg is such a maligned figure. I mean, militarily, I mean, is there anything he can do? I mean, or is he just overwhelming resources that it's inevitable?
Let's say that everything goes the same way, that after Chickamauga, Bragg has pushed the Army of the Cumberland under Rosecrans now all the way to Chattanooga, uh, and we leave it at that. Late September, Grant's not came. There's no other reinforcements. Bragg would have had a chance of at least damaging the Army of the Cumberland enough to possibly get them to have to move. I don't think he's going to capture them. I don't think he's going to be able to overwhelm them, but he may force them to move and try to break out of Chattanooga. And the way he would have done that is simply squeeze a little bit harder in Lookout Valley, which is to the southwest of Chattanooga. That would have kept any supplies coming from Stevenson that might have been coming there, but most of what is coming into Chattanooga is coming over the Cumberland Plateau. which is just to the west. That's probably if he could have kind of kept that from being open, kept that a little bit more secure, which he sent his cavalry over there to do as much as they could. But if he'd have put a little bit more effort into that, he may have forced the Army of the Cumberland to have left a little bit sooner. But again, that hindsight's 2020 and armchair quarterback in here.
So I mean, at this point right here, is the Confederacy now just attempting or trying not to lose, just trying to hang on?
In Tennessee, yes. I don't think Bragg is under any delusion that he's going to destroy another army. He's trying to outmaneuver, and that's a lot of what happens in the West are maneuvers, as opposed to these huge major battles. Like, not that they didn't have major battles in the West, but if you understand what I'm saying, in the East you have these
Hmm.
huge clashes of armies. In the West, there's a lot of maneuvering going on. Um, we see some of those maneuvers in the East, like with the Bristow Station campaign, where Lee is hoping to get behind the Union Army by going around their right flank, but it just scares them and pushes them back. If Bragg could have done something like that in that type of maneuver, and again, that probably would have been the result had he been able to squeeze just a little bit more around Chattanooga. But Bragg is simply trying to hold on as much as possible to as much terrain as he has, as much territory as he has, because he has lost a whole lot since June when the Tullahoma campaigns begin. He loses from Murfreesboro, Tennessee, all the way into northern Georgia. That's a huge swath of territory.
Yeah, that is. I
And
was just thinking about.
yeah, and Rosecrans does that with losing just a handful of troops. I mean, the Tullahoma campaign is essentially bloodless compared to the Vicksburg campaign and the Gettysburg campaign. And Rosecrans admits this, even in his own time when he's writing. He tells people this campaign is extremely important to our war effort. Yet no one will care because Vicksburg and Gettysburg has happened. He says that verbatim, and I can't agree with the man more. He knew exactly what he was talking about. He gained more territory than any Union army had. Uh, it with as much territory, and gained significant locations like Chattanooga and northern Alabama and northern Georgia, with basically losing no men.
You mentioned talked about Knoxville earlier, and this may be a whole different conversation, but is this secondary to the Chattanooga campaign, as far as importance?
The best way to explain it is that Burnside was supposed to be working in conjunction with Rosecrans in the Chattanooga campaign. When Rosecrans fights the Battle of Chickamauga, he anticipates that Burnside will be coming to his aid. He doesn't. Burnside has a lot more problems on his hands. So let's kind of back up and talk about what happens to Burnside when he's in Kentucky. And he gets to Kentucky after Fredericksburg's happened, the Mud March. He gets into Kentucky in 1863, and he's got his Ninth Corps with him, and he's getting a whole other corps. It'll eventually be called the 23rd Corps. So he'll have two corps to invade East Tennessee. So somewhere close to 20,000. Well, probably is not as close. Probably not close to 20,000, but he's got around 15,000, maybe even closer to 20,000, depending on if he wanted to concentrate every force in Kentucky he had. So he's got that much to invade East Tennessee. And when he's about to set off, he loses the Ninth Corps. The Ninth Corps gets taken away from him and sent all the way to Vicksburg. And so he's left with the 23rd Corps, which is made up of a lot of them are new units, so they've never entered combat before. And he is expected to go into East Tennessee, which he does brilliantly, captures East Tennessee, captures Knoxville, and now he's got to secure the region with around 8,000 men. That's not possible. He
Hmm.
is having to spread his army across a huge territory from mostly they're concentrating from Cumberland Gap all the way to the southeast to Morristown, Tennessee, and around Greenville area, and then all the way to Knoxville and south toward Chattanooga. That's a huge bunch of territory. And he just doesn't have the men to go to concentrate them again and then move on to Chattanooga to help Rosecrans, because then it would open up East Tennessee to any attack that the Confederates wanted to launch, and they'd lose all that territory all over again. And they don't want to do that. So it's supposed to go in conjunction with Rosecrans, but it's just not feasibly possible. Burnside gets um, got a lot of critique from the federal government, from the Lincoln administration, because he doesn't help Rosecrans. But in reality, he couldn't. There's just no way. But his East Tennessee campaign and Rosecrans's push into uh, push to Chattanooga and northern Georgia are done somewhat in conjunction with one another, but they're just not able to ever link up.
So let me ask you this. I mean, that was obviously, I mean, as bad of moments as Burnside had, that seems to be one of his, his finest moment. But what about Longstreet? I mean, did that show that, some people are meant to be corps commanders, division commanders, that, the Peter principle? Because I mean, Longstreet didn't have a good showing as in the independent command, correct?
Correct. Longstreet, there's a lot of people who love Longstreet, but when it comes to him having an independent command, um, he doesn't have a good showing. And so while Bragg is surrounding Chattanooga, or trying to surround Chattanooga, that partial siege, again, Bragg thinks he has enough time to deal with Burnside, which is just to their north in Knoxville. And one reason he sends Longstreet north is he just wants to get him out of his hair. But he does apparently have enough faith in Longstreet that he can recapture Knoxville and East Tennessee, that not only does he send Longstreet's corps, which is only 2 divisions at the time, he also is getting ready to send 2 other divisions. He's getting ready to send Bushrod Johnson's division, and he's getting ready to send Patrick Cleburne's division. Patrick Cleburne's men are on the trains. They're getting ready to head north when they get the recall to come back to Missionary Ridge. So, I mean, it was very close. And Bushrod Johnson goes on to Longstreet, and Longstreet has roughly 3 divisions in his corps in East Tennessee. So Braxton Bragg really, that proves that he did not believe Grant was going to move anytime soon. He thought Longstreet had enough time to go and to capture Knoxville and come back, but I don't think Longstreet had any indication of coming back. He was going to stay in East Tennessee and get away from Bragg and be independent. When he goes into East Tennessee, he tries to lay a partial siege to Knoxville. Burnside outruns him and delays him all the way to Knoxville, so Longstreet has to attack in the bloody attack on Fort Sanders, which ends horribly for Longstreet. Longstreet just kind of sits idle in winter quarters. He'll win a few battles like at Bean Station, but they don't. It's just a tactical victory. It's not a strategic victory. And Burnside just keeps hemming him in, just pushing him further and further away. Eventually, Burnside leaves and goes over to the Eastern Theater, where he fights in the Overland Campaign. And it's John G. Foster, and then it's John M. Schofield that take over East Tennessee. But they all do pretty well against Longstreet, just pushing him away. Longstreet is having a hard time supplying his men because he's far away from everything else, and he has no direct link to the Army of Tennessee. So Longstreet has a horrible showing. And when Confederates are trying to retake East Tennessee and regain all those resources, it's very lackluster, and it never falls back into Confederate hands.
That leads my next question. I remember you saying one time that I think it was on the Gettysburg campaign or something. Lee uh, stayed around Longstreet. He liked being around Longstreet, but at the same time, he was around him because Longstreet needed prodding. Is that what happened to him in independent command? He did not have anybody there to kind of guide him into action.
Sometimes I don't know. Some people may hate me for this comment, but Longstreet, um, I don't know if he needed prodded, but I think he needed to be taken back to reality, because when he's in Knoxville and around Knoxville near Morristown, Tennessee, he's coming up with these grandiose plans. Like
Hmm.
he advocates for when Albert Sidney John, I'm sorry, when Joseph E. Johnston takes command of the Army of Tennessee, he advocates the Army of Tennessee switching places with the Army of Northern Virginia, and him and Lee going and capturing Nashville. Um, Longstreet wants to invade and go all the way up to the Ohio River, and Johnston has to remind him, "You don't have the wagons to do that. That's not going to be possible." And plus, Kentucky is completely full of Union troops at the time. There's no way you're going to be moving into that territory without
The
being
Army of
destroyed
Northern
once you
Virginia
get
and
there.
Tennessee changing places.
Yes, the Army of Northern
Oh,
Virginia and the Army of
okay.
Tennessee switching places. So the Army of Northern Virginia coming to around Knoxville and pushing towards Nashville, and the Army of Tennessee going up to Richmond and fighting in the Overland Campaign. So
Logistically, is that even possible? I
I mean, by
mean,
railroads, yes, but I don't. It's not wise. There's no way
yeah.
you're going to move two armies at the same time and get in the proper place. So again, I think having a general over top of Longstreet helps bring him back to reality.
Um. So, I mean, is he the epitome of the Peter principle?
Not all the way. I think Longstreet does well as a corps commander as long as he's got somebody over top of him able to guide him in a direction.
Right.
Sometimes he can be directionless. So I don't
But I
think
mean, as
he's
independent command, I mean, he was
as
not. I
independent
mean,
command. Yeah, I mean, I can think of quite a few generals who probably would have been better at an independent command in East Tennessee than him. Um, I
but you
mean,
have to think that he would be the perfect one, wouldn't you? I mean, he's Lee's old war horse. I mean, how? Why would you not think, you know, he could be a commander? Is that a fair statement?
that's kind of that's how I kind of think about it, and I think Bragg saw it the same way. Again, he wouldn't have gave or been sending Longstreet 2 divisions from his army if he didn't have some kind of confidence in him. There had been some kind of confidence in Longstreet that he would get the job done. You know, the Army of Northern Virginia had won battles, countless battles at that point, and were seen as the epitome of the Southern spirit. And Bragg's army hadn't won anything except for the Battle of Perryville and just then at the Battle of Chickamauga. So maybe he saw Longstreet might have had something there, but Longstreet performs horribly under Bragg as well around Chattanooga. Longstreet's supposed to secure the Lookout Valley. That's when the Army of the Potomac's 2 corps had made it to the Lookout Valley, and he's supposed to protect it. And he launches a night battle called the Battle of Wauhatchie, and just gets horribly, uh, horribly
Mm.
thrown back. And Bragg is kind of confused because he was going to give Longstreet more troops, and Longstreet says, "No, I can do it with the troops I have." And so they launch a night battle for one, which never turns out well. And Longstreet just uses a couple of his brigades to try to break up the Union forces in Lookout Valley, and it's not even close. Although they do slow down some troops, but that's because it's darkness and they don't know what's ahead of them.
Oh, I can't even imagine that. In formation like that, walking into a nighttime attack. Um, Let me ask you, sir. So I know that there was a lot of infighting with, and this might be a tough question, but infighting with Bragg's staff. But in this Chattanooga campaign, is there dissension in the ranks, or the officers are they going at each other? Are they trying to undercut Bragg's authority?
Most of the generals that didn't like Bragg or couldn't work with him were already gone at that point. I'm
Okay.
not saying there wasn't any dissension. What I'm saying is Leonidas Polk, he was sent to Mississippi.
Hmm.
He was in charge of that. He's in charge when Sherman tests out his theory of marching to the sea when he marches to Meridian, Mississippi. And D.H. Hill is really taken out of command. And so there's still men that don't like Bragg, don't get me wrong, but like men like William Hardy, one of the old reliables of the Army of Tennessee as a corps commander, is wonderful, is can work with Bragg. He might not like him, but at least he can work with him to some extent. He did leave at one point, but that was right before the Battle of Chickamauga. He wasn't there at Chickamauga, but Hardee could work with Bragg if he had to. So there was dissension. Um, I'm not sure if it probably assisted, but I don't think it had a huge effect on what happened with the Army of Tennessee losing outside of Chattanooga. It helped, but I don't think it was the factor.
After routing at Chattanooga and the Army, the Union retreating, um, was Bragg just too bloodied to close the deal?
Following Chickamauga,
Yeah.
that's a hard question to answer. I think if you asked 100 historians, they'd probably give you 100 different answers on that. Um, the Army of Tennessee was horribly bloodied after Chickamauga. They had fought and fought for a couple of days at that point, and then they push on to Chattanooga. Would they have had a chance to? I mean, there were still some troops that might have had some fight left in them, but once Rosecrans's troops get to Chattanooga, Rosecrans is an excellent organizer, and he's organizing defensive works, and that's one reason he gets removed is because he stays in Chattanooga organizing those instead of going back to the battlefield. But he will go back. He will go to Chattanooga and start throwing up defensive works, trying to guard against the Confederates pursuing him. Uh, Unless Bragg was willing to do a forced march that pushed them all the way up to Chattanooga, which I don't, again, they fought for 2 days. I think they were a little too bloodied to attack at the moment that would have sealed the deal to have ended the Army of the Cumberland's time in Tennessee.
So you talk Grant showing up. For people who may not know, of course, Vicksburg fell on July 4th, 1863. Where was Grant from then until he showed up in November?
Grant is he's around Vicksburg mostly. He's between Vicksburg and Memphis, and he's essentially trying to manage along the Mississippi River. And by the time that happens in July, he's there through August, and by the time September rolls around, he's already he's getting he's got a huge let's put it this way, he's got a lot of eyes on him with Abraham Lincoln, just absolutely happy that he found someone that he can use to fight um, fight other Confederate armies, someone that will fight. Put that way. And so in
Um,
September, with Chattanooga being under siege, that's when stuff goes into motion of trying to help that army. And so this will uh, once Chattanooga is needed help, they start sending the Army of the Potomac there and start sending the Army of the Tennessee there, and that's when Grant starts moving. He arrives in Chattanooga roughly mid October.
and this may be a probably a question that's off topic on this, and we're talking about Chattanooga being the turn point. But Joseph Johnston was the commander in the West End. Did he not have any troops to slow him from moving?
Johnston was a weird was in a weird position. I'm saying he was weird. He was in a weird position when he was in command in the Western Theater. So yes, he did technically command every single army in in Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, and Tennessee that was Confederate troops. Yet when it came to when it came to like Braxton Bragg's army, he was more of a suggestive role. Like, you might need to do this, you might need to do that. He was more of send troops here, send troops there. He didn't order anybody to do anything. That's kind of how it was. And yeah, um, he kept an eye on the situation with Grant, and then we get the Meridian campaign with William T. Sherman. But Joseph E. Johnston didn't take personal command of troops except for like around when Vicksburg is finally getting captured. He will personally command troops going towards Jackson.
I want to go back to this. Talking about the uh, crops and stuff in East Tennessee. So, was that not only feeding the armies, but was that also feeding the populace? I mean, did that put when they losing that, did that put a more strain on the populations in North Alabama, East Virginia, or excuse me, East Tennessee, Georgia?
Uh, when Union soldiers take it over,
Yeah, when they cut off that right there, I mean, because where were people being able to get fed from then? I mean, if when they lost that, are they not only losing the army, but feeding the army, but also the civilians?
the most civilians are growing their own crops. Now
Okay.
you will have major cities where that's not possible. And yes, there are bread riots and things that happen in various cities as the war continues on. So that can be seen as a reason. So you've got a lot of um, you got
In
a lot of
southern cities,
uplift.
bread riots?
Uh, yeah, yeah, the bread riots. You've got a whole bunch of s- uplift and a lot of people angry with the Confederate government because they view this as the government not helping them. And one thing that an outcome of the Civil War that most people don't realize is how much it helped women gain a political voice. So
Oh, really?
so what happens is before the Civil War, women are seen as non-political. They're not supposed to be
Hmm.
involved in politics. Not saying they didn't, and some didn't run those circles, but in general, women aren't supposed to be into politics. But once the war begins, they view them sending off their husbands, brothers, and sons to the Confederate war effort as a contract between themselves and the Confederate government. I'm giving you my husband, I'm giving you my brother, my
Mm.
son to fight in this war, and in return, you protect me and you help me.
Hmm.
And so when their sons and husbands are dying, or there's Union's forces coming through their area and taking their food away, they're writing letters to politicians. That doesn't happen on a mass scale before the war, but it ramps up tremendously once the war begins. And all these incursions are coming by Union forces. And so they write to the Confederate government saying, "You promised to help me if I sent my husband away, and now he's gone, and I have no one to protect me." And so we have a huge role. Women start taking on a new role in politics. And again, they're not entering political office, but they're fighting back. They're saying they're going to campaign against this politician if he doesn't help try to get more troops in my region. It's a very grassroots movement. So one thing we forget, and the bread riots were led by women. There was women that broke into those stores and took the food. It was because, again, that contract that they felt they had signed by giving their husbands to the war had failed. There was a breakdown between them and the Confederate government.
What is the perception of men? I mean, like it's like who are still at home. I mean, when you have women taking on this type of role, I mean, how was that received?
Uh, you know what? I'm not sure about how that kind of.
Yeah, I'm not probably kind of
I
tough
know.
question.
No, I know that one way I can answer it is um, it was a shock to a lot of people
Hmm.
because because politicians were getting um, all these letters, and the politicians sometimes really discounted women's voices, so they would just kind of
Right.
toss them aside and not
It
really
was what,
care.
60 years or 1919 for women got the right to vote or something like that?
Right, right. So the early 20th century before they ever got the right to vote. So some male politicians just cast them aside. Some would try to help, and some did a little bit of both, and just tried to hold the situation together best they could. The men on the ground were having the same problems because these men that are on the home front, they're also being attacked. So there's not a pushback from them for women becoming more politically active. The men are becoming more politically active. Men that have never wrote a letter to Congress might be writing a letter to the Confederate Congress and requesting more troops in their area.
Um, So you talked about the rail line earlier in Chattanooga. Was that the most vital rail line? I mean, more power than or more important than Corinth? Um,
That's a good question. I personally think it is more important than Corinth, but
Corinth.
I,
My bad, I said
I,
Corinth.
I that's all right. But I completely understand people that believe Corinth is one of the most important railroad junctions, and it was. But once you get past April, May of 1862, that ceases to be a vital railroad. It then shifts all the
Mm.
way to Chattanooga.
So that
So
linked what Atlanta to? Uh, did it go all the way to Richmond? And you said North Alabama?
yeah, it basically the East Tennessee and Virginia Railroad. Um, Technically, that went from Knoxville to Bristol, Virginia. So it's not a very long railroad. But its extension is the East Tennessee, Virginia, and Georgia Railroad, which or East Tennessee and Georgia Railroad, which runs from Knoxville down to Chattanooga, northern Georgia. Kind of taken together, I classify them as the East Tennessee and Virginia Railroad, and that carries, yeah, it goes from Chattanooga almost in a direct line. Um, you can take it from Chattanooga, it hits Knoxville, Bristol, I think it hits Lynchburg, and then goes into Richmond. Again, it
Now,
changes names, but
for
from
people,
once it leaves Bristol. But yes, it is a direct link between
uh, for,
Chattanooga and Richmond.
for people who may not know, I mean, I know in Sherman destroyed the railroads, as he went south. Were those railroads kept intact to keep resupplying Union troops as they went into Atlanta, or were they destroyed?
No, 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 they were left alone. If they ever were destroyed for any reason, they would have been repaired very quickly.
So by taking Chattanooga, all right, so Vicksburg, it says, you cut the Confederacy in two. Was the Confederacy even cut more in two because you cut off Virginia, from Tennessee, Alabama?
I think so. Vicksburg gets the credit for cutting the Confederacy in half, but that's not half. That's more like a
Mhm.
third that you're cutting off. And I think the more important two-thirds is what's left. It's when you cut those two away from one another directly. So they're still connected. They can still troops can still move through Atlanta and then go to Augusta and South Carolina and Georgia, North Carolina and go up to Virginia. But that's a longer route, and it's definitely adds a lot more time to any communication or troop movement that you're wanting to do. So in a sense, you hinder the Confederate war effort tremendously by doing that.
So really, from that point, I mean, losing Chattanooga. I mean, I know people want to say Atlanta, but that was really the final nail in the coffin.
Wasn't the final, but I think it might be the biggest nail in the coffin. That real when you take Chattanooga, you strangle the life out of the Confederacy. You've got so it's like when you cut the blood flow off to you. You don't immediately die, but you die a lot quicker. So the Chattanooga is similar. You've cut a vital vein. It's not one of these small veins. No, you've cut the carotid artery. You've got a few more seconds, which for the Confederacy is another year and a half that you're going to have to survive. If Chattanooga hadn't been captured, it would have taken a lot longer for the Confederacy to have withered away. And that was really one of my when I went to a conference a couple of years ago. That was my contention was that East Tennessee staying in the Union prolonged the life of the Confederacy, and vice versa. Once it was captured, it led to its demise a lot quicker.
So, I mean, I know we've got Longstreet deployed there. Was there just no available troops left for the Confederacy to spare to try to come and hold on to this area?
Yeah, there was so many. Uh, well, This is even before Grant becomes commander of all Union forces, but the idea that Abraham Lincoln and Grant kind of discussed, where those not skinning can hold a leg, as they said, you need to put pressure along the entire Union front, entire Confederate front. Just keep pressure, and they'll have to run out of troops eventually. So if you can, if you don't even have to defeat the Confederate forces in your front, you just have to keep them busy, and that's what it was. So they could have had troops and pushed them somewhere else, but that would have left open other locations. So the Meridian campaign that Sherman launches in, I think it's February '64, uh, there's a nice sizable force under Leonidas Polk in Mississippi at the time. But because Sherman's moving through there, you can't divert the troops from there. Um, the coastal troops, and then you got politics involved, where troops that are stationed, like local troops that are stationed in South Carolina and Florida and Southern Alabama, they don't want to leave home, so
Right.
they could mutiny. So you got local politics to
Ah,
deal with. And that's one of my very first conference papers I ever wrote, was about the Alabama troops in Southern Alabama, how they tried to mutiny at one point, and a lot of
oh,
it was
really?
they didn't want to leave their region, but also the Confederates believed that they had been infiltrated by a peace society, and
Oh, how
and
interesting.
so
What was it? Was it General Taylor? Was that his name? It was head of Alabama troops, or
that wasn't his troops. The troops that I wrote about was Dabney H. Maury. He
I've never even heard of
had
him.
Yeah, he was in control of some troops in Southern Alabama. He kind of got moved around everywhere. He never stayed in one place too awfully long. He was the commander in East Tennessee at one point,
Huh,
and when he got sent to Southern Alabama, and this happens around Pensacola and the
I love
Alabama
that spot.
line, and Maury writes about this mutiny that happens, and he says, I guarantee this peace society has came in from Alabama units that's been stationed in East Tennessee, because these peace societies will infiltrate regiments, and then the idea spreads. So it's like a virus, and it goes. They apparently he was connecting his time in East Tennessee with the peace and the riots that happened, or the mutinies that happened in Southern Alabama.
Okay, just a couple more quick questions here for you. So when this Chattanooga siege or whatever was going on, what was the Confederate cavalry under Forrest and Wheeler doing?
Forrest was out in Mississippi at the time, although he was launching um, a few raids into Tennessee. He was mostly having to deal with troops, with Union forces coming out of Memphis, and he was doing a fairly good job of containing. I won't say completely defeating, but he was containing Union forces in Mississippi, in northern Mississippi. And that's one reason that in '64, that when Sherman launches the Meridian campaign, it doesn't go exactly like Sherman wants, because the force that's supposed to link up with him from Memphis can't get past Forrest. So Forrest was in Mississippi trying to hold back a force a lot larger than his, and he was very successful at it. But they were keeping him busy. And
Okay.
again, that as Lincoln said, those not skinning can hold a leg. So when you're skinning a deer or something, you might need some help, and if you're not skinning, at least holding a leg is going to help.
That's a great statement.
Lincoln
Okay,
had
Doc.
so many good little one-liners. I try to use them as much as possible because they are
Yeah,
so
I've never
good.
heard that before. That one was so great. But okay, Doctor, well, I've held you almost an hour. I know you got probably gotta get up and do stuff in the morning. There's a couple questions I want to ask you before we end, but is there anything else you'd like to say to close this out?
No, not really. This is I love talking about East Tennessee and its importance to the Confederate war effort. And hopefully, I can indoctrinate a few other people to the importance of East Tennessee, Chattanooga, and other areas. I'm not saying there's not other smaller turning points, but I see East Tennessee's capture as one of the biggest nails in the Confederate coffin.
Thank you again for the conversation.
Oh, no problem.